and 2. And now here's some of the House Rules debate for that Mueller resolution from earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purposes of debate only. I ask unanimous consent that all members be given 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the Rules Committee met and reported a rule, House Resolution 208, providing for consideration of House Concurrent Resolution 24, a resolution expressing the sense of Congress that the report of Special Counsel Mueller in the sense of Congress that special counsel should be made available to the public and to Congress. The rule provides for consideration of the legislation under a closed rule. The rule self-executes 2 amendments that simply clarify that the resolution is calling for the release of the special counsel's findings in addition to any report. It provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. And finally, the rule provides the standard recess procedures for the period of March 15th through March 22nd. Mr. Speaker, when the Justice Department named the special counsel for the Russia investigation, Acting Attorney General Rod Rosenstein said at the time, quote, "A special counsel is necessary in order for the American people to have full confidence in the outcome. Our nation is grounded in the rule of law, and the public must be assured that government officials administer the law fairly." This investigation has been about following the facts wherever they may lead, getting to the truth of Russia's involvement in the 2016 election, and ensuring government is transparent and accountable to the American public. This resolution does not predetermine the outcome of that investigation. It simply expresses that the report of the special counsel should be made available to the Congress and the American people. The public, including my constituents in California, our constituents in California, Mr. Speaker, want to know what happened. Nearly 9 in 10 Americans in both parties say the investigation should produce a full public report on their findings. Not only do the American people want to know, but they deserve to know. Congress needs to preserve their ability to know. Our election system is an integral part of what makes us the beacon of Western democracy. Any and all attempts to undermine this system is an attack on our country's values and cannot be taken lightly. This is a serious investigation with consequences for our elections, democracy, government, and the future of this country and democracy itself. There is no one with more intimate knowledge of Russia's involvement in our election than special counsel. To date, this investigation has resulted in 34 people in 3 companies being criminally charged, nearly 200 charges filed, 7 guilty pleas, 1 conviction following a jury trial, and the investigation, while costing $25 million, has recovered approximately $48 million in assets from tax evasion. Mr. Speaker, 8 federal and congressional intelligence and national security groups believe Russia interfered in our election. With the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, the FBI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence concluding that Vladimir Putin personally, quote, ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election to undermine public faith in the democratic process, end quotes. The last time our country had a special counsel operating under the same rules as this probe was in 1993 to investigate the Waco siege and allegations of government wrongdoing. Prosecutors posted their final report directly on the internet with hundreds of pages of exhibits and timelines. The American people must receive the same transparency when this report is released. I encourage my friends across the aisle to support the release of this report. We have commitments to support it from 3 House Republican leaders, including the Minority Leader, the Minority Whip, and the Republican Conference Chair. And I hope all of my colleagues across the aisle will join us in this vote to ensure that we are on the record, that we share one of the most important investigations of our time within these halls and with all of America. This is happening in our watch, and it is our job to be faithful to our oath to defend and uphold democracy. As Justice Brandeis famously said, sunlight is said to be the best disinfectant. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my friend from California for yielding the time. Mr. Speaker, when I see someone of your stature come to the chair, I think we must be down here to debate some serious American public policy. We must be down here to change the law in ways that it can only happen once in a generation when people come together to make things happen. And I don't know what they told you when you came to the chair this morning, but let me be the first to tell you that's not at all why we're here today. What we're here to say today is important, that the American people have a vested interest in confidence in our democracy. That's a value shared from the furthest side of the left to the furthest side of the right. But the resolution we have here before us today is just a restatement of current law. Sometimes I think, Mr. Speaker, that we undermine faith in the democracy when we try to pretend that division exists where division does not, where we try to pretend that we're doing great things when in fact we are not. This is an opportunity today to speak with a voice in Congress that says the special counsel should release the report. But let me be clear, because we sometimes do more harm than good. That's going to be the headline. House votes for special counsel to release the report. That's not actually what the resolution says. And I want to guide you. If you've got a copy, Mr. Chairman, you can go back through. It's not going to be on page 1. It's not going to be on page 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. The real substance of the resolution is back on page bottom of page 5, early on page 6, and it says to the extent permitted by law, because as you know from your legal background, Mr. Speaker, the law does not allow the special counsel to release so many things. Grand jury testimony, for example. Nowhere in the country is grand jury testimony disclosed. Those facts are gathered, but that's never disclosed. Intelligence sources and methods, that's never disclosed, nor would anybody on the other side of the aisle suggest that it should be. That's why in the resolution drafted by the Democratic chairman of the Judiciary Committee, it says specifically these things shall not be released, need not be released, because it's prohibited by law. I only make that point, Mr. Chairman, because sometimes the headlines are all we read when they come through on our Twitter feed. Sometimes the headline, we believe, tells the whole story. And I just want to make it clear that there is unanimity in this chamber that transparency is valuable in our republic. But it is also true that this is a nation of laws. The reason the special counsel exists is because we're a nation of law, and the substance of the special counsel's report is going to be governed by those laws. And to the extent allowable by law, our Attorney General has already said he wants to make the entire thing available. I don't know how you want to characterize the resolution today, Mr. Speaker, whether you want to characterize it as an insistence of the House on how the administration should behave, or just a big attaboy to our new Attorney General to say you're doing a great job and we're behind you 100% in what you've already promised the American people you were going to do. However you characterize that resolution, we heard it in the Rules Committee. As my friend from California suggested, it's coming to the floor today under a closed rule, so if anybody has any additional changes they want to make, those changes will not be permitted. This is a take-it-or-leave-it resolution from the Rules Committee today. But as a restatement of current law, it's quite clear. Again, you have to go all the way to the back of the resolution to find those 10 lines of substance. But when you get there, you'll find these are already things the Attorney General has agreed to, and all Americans should be pleased about that outcome. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Georgia reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Well, first off, let me join in my friend from Georgia noting how important it is that you are presiding, my good friend with lots of history between the two of us in our political life in California and our education, I might add, to the Jesuits. And I want to say to my good friend, I look at this as one of those opportunities where we may not get a headline. Unfortunately, too many of the headlines talk about how divisive it is here, and certainly there's a lot of that. But when I go home and do town halls, and I do a lot of them in Northern California, when this question comes up about polarization, I talk about all the times we do work together that don't get out, certainly in the headlines, because that's not what sells advertising, apparently. I think this is one of those moments that we aspire to that we actually aspire, somebody picks up on this, that all of us in this extraordinary circumstances are being faithful to our oath, that we make sure that the things that may have happened, that apparently did happen, that the public that needs confidence of us, and when we look at every day, including today at the affronts and the attacks on so many institutions in America, and this institution having had challenges, this might be one of those opportunities, at least for us to say, we agree. We may have differences of opinion about who did what, but we have faith. And for me, I think history will say that this special counsel is one of those providential Americans with his background, with his determination to believe in fidelity and truth. We were lucky to have this person at this point in time. So I put my faith in this institution. I put the faith in special counsel. And in this instance, I really hear from you, my friend from Georgia, that we're going to put our faith in this institution and one another, that we can show the American people that this is indeed more important than party. It's more important than any of our individual political careers. I did want to mention, Mr. Speaker, that this is a sense of Congress, that this is not the first time we have brought a resolution like this to the floor. In fact, just last week, we brought a resolution to the floor to send a message to the American people that Congress is united in condemning anti-Semitism and bigotry in all its forms. There were people who criticized us for bringing that and thought it was unnecessary. But when we brought that to the floor, a majority of Republicans joined Democrats, an overwhelming majority in voting for it. Leader McCarthy called it a resolution to make a statement. Whip Scalise said regarding the resolution, we must take a strong stand against hatred and bigotry wherever we see it, and I'm glad this resolution makes sense. So we agree with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle that passing these types of resolutions can make a strong statement, and although they may seem to some as unnecessary, these statements and these kind of important issues, I believe, are very necessary for this institution to take, and particularly when they are bipartisan. Today, we are letting the Attorney General Barr and everyone else know that we are all united behind one common principle, which I believe he agrees to in his confirmation hearings, that the member from Georgia alluded to, that transparency, complete transparency, is vital, consistent with the law, to the success of our democracy, and that the American people deserve to have access to this report. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The distinguished gentleman from California reserves. The distinguished gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 7 minutes to a senior member of the Rules Committee, Subcommittee Chairman, Ranking Member on the Energy and Commerce Committee, the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 7 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. So today I'll rise in opposition to the rule providing for consideration of H-Con Res 24 to release the special counsel's investigation report, a report that I may note has not yet been issued. The resolution we're considering here today will not change the law. It will not increase transparency. It will provide no new benefit to the American people. Quite simply, this resolution merely states current law. This resolution simply restates current Department of Justice protocol. You know, we had a member here in this House who was also a physician, who's a member of the other party, former Congressman McDermott of Washington State. And I remember one time when Republicans offered a sense of Congress resolution that had something to do with taxes. The gentleman took to the floor of the House and said, if you want to do something about taxes, do something about taxes. But a sense of Congress resolution, why, you might as well be sending a get well card to the IRS. So that's the force with which we are exercising our congressional time today. As Speaker Pelosi and the Democratic leadership have decided to use valuable legislative time to consider a resolution that changes nothing and does not serve the American people. The time that we have spent debating this resolution, we could have been discussing more serious matters before this body. And let's just run through a few of them. The Born Alive Survivors, Abortion Survivors Protection Act has been brought to the floor 17 times, and yet the current Democratic leadership refuses to bring up this legislation for a vote. And I might remind the body, this bill is not about abortion, but saving the lives of children who are in fact born alive. You know, I don't make it a habit of watching 60 Minutes on television, but last Sunday night, 60 Minutes had a news story on the dramatic advances in the treatment and perhaps inching towards a cure for sickle cell disease. Sickle cell disease is a painful condition I witnessed many times as a resident of Parkland Hospital back in the 1970s. For years, sickle cell received very little attention. Now, I'm happy to say in the last Congress, under the leadership of Danny Davis of Illinois, our subcommittee worked on and passed his resolution dealing with sickle cell. It finally was passed by the Senate in October of last year and then was signed into law by the President last December. As a consequence, the push for sickle cell research has continued. The cures for the 21st century, which this Congress worked on in at the end of the previous administration, certainly can be given some credit for that. But it was, I have to tell you, it was dramatic to have the director of the NIH interviewed on 60 Minutes talking about a cure for sickle cell. So our work that we do here is important. It does impact the lives of real people, and I think that is just one dramatic example. Well, another example was the first tax reform in 31 years that was signed into law last year, and here we are a month out from tax day. We could use this time to strengthen the progress we made on the tax reform that was passed last year. In the last Congress, we helped American people keep more of their hard-earned money. We should be working to continue that momentum, perhaps make those tax cuts permanent for the middle class. We could be discussing the Democrats' government-run, bureaucratic, top-down health care plan that would strip hardworking Americans of their private health insurance and offer less coverage at more expense to American taxpayers, but we're not. Today, we could be talking about patent abuse entities, so-called patent trolls, particularly troublesome in the Eastern District of Texas, where most of those cases are litigated. The House could be considering the Troll Act, legislation that I've introduced for 3 terms of Congress to limit patent assertion entities and protect Americans' intellectual property. We could be using this time to discuss our nation's critical need for border security, to protect the American people and defend our borders. In February of 2019, the shortest month of the year, only 28 days, more than 75,000 people that we know of crossed the border without legal status. Excess of 100% increase from the same period last year. People argue whether that's an emergency. I believe that it is, but we could be talking about that. In a week in which more than 150 people lost their lives, we could be using this time to discuss aviation safety. And does Congress need to do anything further to ensure the continued safety of the American traveling public? So time and again, we found that members on the other side of the dais are far more interested in discrediting the president than working on policy that will help the American people. This president, who in the first 2 years and 2 months of this administration has probably been more productive than any presidency in the last 50 years. And finally, Mr. Speaker, we could be using this time to address the false and misleading comments that a member of the Judiciary Committee made about the Department of Health and Human Services. Last month, a member of this House grossly mischaracterized the work being done by the Department of Health and Human Services to care for unaccompanied alien children by stating that the Office of Refugee Resettlement created, quoting here, an environment of systemic sexual assaults by Health and Human Service staff on unaccompanied alien children, close quote. Mr. Speaker, that accusation is false, and it was made without that member having ever actually visited an ORR facility. Those comments are a discredit to the effort by dedicated personnel of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, those employees, to deal with a problem that dates back to the Obama administration when the Office of Refugee Resettlement was unprepared for the task. If Democrats, would the gentleman yield an additional minute?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Look,
if you don't like the work that the Office of Refugee Resettlement is doing, you are in the majority. You have the ability to introduce legislation and pass legislation to do something different. Instead of standing here today discussing this superfluous resolution, the Democrats could be using this time to change a law that they clearly don't like. At this point, Mr. Speaker, may I ask unanimous consent to place into the record a letter from the Agency of Children and Families regarding this issue. So here's the bottom line. Was that unanimous consent agreed to?
Yes, it was.
And here's the bottom line. House Democrats do not like the President of the United States, and we know that. Less than 3 months into the 116th Congress, the Democrats have shown that they will work against President Trump to the detriment of the American people. We are here in the United States House of Representatives to serve the American people, and the legislation we are considering here today will not do that. President Trump has urged us at the State of the Union, asked all of the members present to reject the politics of revenge, resistance, and retribution, and embrace the boundless potential of cooperation, compromise, and the common good. I also believe this is possible, and I recommend we get on with the task. I yield back.
This is Congressman from Georgia Reserve. The gentleman reserves.
Mr.
The Speaker recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to be recognized by you. Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, the distinguished chair of the Committee on House Administration, Ms.
The gentleman
Lofgren.
from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this resolution today. We have a responsibility to the American people to uphold the Constitution and rule of law, and we also have an obligation as a separate and equal branch of government to act as a check on the executive branch. Without access to necessary information, we can't fulfill our constitutionally prescribed duties. We must have not only this report, but the evidence collected to support the report. If the President has nothing to hide, then he will also support this resolution by tweet or verbal approval. I am proud to be a co-sponsor of this resolution. It's very important for our country, and I yield back to the gentleman from California.
Reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Rhode Island, the distinguished chairman of the Committee on the Judiciary Subcommittee on Antitrust, Commercial, and Administrative Law, Mr. Cicilline.
The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of this resolution. Special Counsel Mueller's investigation has resulted in 199 criminal charges against 39 people and entities. 7 people have pleaded guilty and 5 people have been sentenced to prison. This investigation has been conducted on behalf of the American people, and they are entitled to know the results of this investigation. This investigation was begun to safeguard our democracy, and the American people deserve to know the results of this investigation. And yet President Trump has repeatedly sought to attack and discredit the investigation, labeling it a witch hunt and even contemplating firing the special counsel. The president's pick for Attorney General Bill Barr has also made it clear during his confirmation hearing that he will only follow DOJ policies that are convenient for the president. Therefore, it's up to Congress to make sure that documents related to the special counsel's investigation are preserved and published. And that's why I introduced the Special Counsel Transparency Act with Congressman Doggett to require the publication of the special counsel's report. No one person should decide what the public gets to see. The American people have a right to come to their own conclusions and to know that justice was served. So I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of the American people. Allow them to see the results of the investigation conducted on their behalf. Bring transparency to this process, support this resolution, and signal a willingness to respect the right of the American people to see the consequences and the results of this important investigation, which again was begun to safeguard our democracy. This shouldn't be a Republican or Democratic issue. I hope my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will join us in our effort to preserve our democracy. And with that, I yield back and thank again the gentleman.
The gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume, and I want to ask my friend from Rhode Island before he left the floor. The bill that you introduced, was that also a House resolution, or was that an HR to insist on the revealing? I yield to my friend.
The legislation I introduced is an HR, but if the point of your question is that a more effective way to do it, I would welcome support on my resolution. I haven't been as successful getting my Republican colleagues to join us. We're hoping that this resolution is a way for you to find your way toward transparency, democracy, and the spirit of bipartisanship, and letting the American people know the results of the investigation.
I appreciate my friend. I appreciate him introducing the bill, and I think that's an important distinction, Mr. Speaker, and that's what you've heard largely. You heard it in the Rules Committee. You've heard it down here on the floor, is that, listen, there are lots of things we could be doing here, and if we wanted to pass a law that insisted that the entire report was released, those parts that are prohibited from being released under current law and those parts that are intended to be released under current law, we could do that. That's just not what we're doing. What we're doing is saying, hey, you know what current law is? Follow current law. Follow current law. We, the House of Representatives, have thought about it, and in our deliberative wisdom, we are prepared to announce that we believe current law should be followed. Signed, U.S. House of Representatives. There are those who would have you believe this is something more than that. It's not. There's nothing wrong with what we're doing today, except that it's not a particularly valuable use of time. When I opened, Mr. Speaker, you were not in the chair, but I mentioned that I think we do great damage to trust in our republic when we seek division instead of highlighting our unity. To suggest that we're down here doing something to protect our republic from its inevitable demise is just ridiculous. No such thing is happening here on the floor today. All that's happening on the floor today is we're saying we, the duly elected members of the U.S. House of Representatives, believe U.S. law should be followed. I agree, and I reserve.
Thank you. The gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
In response to my friend from Georgia, I want to agree, and maybe we disagree a little bit. I do think this is important, and I think it's the unusual circumstances, and a lot of things that we have no direct control over have brought us to this circumstance. Social media and the use of social media in our elections is relatively new, coming from the Bay Area, where so much of this the genesis happened. So I think it is important, and I do think there's lacking in hyperbole is something that sometimes doesn't happen in this chamber, but I think it's not hyperbole to say that the U.S. House of Representatives hopefully unanimously says that the law should be followed to its letter. So I think we agree, and I don't want to look for a way to disagree. But with that, I will now ask Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch.
The gentleman from Vermont is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I don't know what's in the Mueller report, and neither do you. The American people don't know what's in the Mueller report, but they want to know, and I want to know as you do. And why not? 81% of the American people polled say they want to know, and that includes 79% of the Republicans. That's good news, because what we do know, without knowing the details of the Mueller report, is that really bad stuff happened in the last election. Some of it was in a campaign, and some of it was in a foreign country that is our severe adversary. And I speak, of course, of Vladimir Putin's Russia. But the bad stuff, a former campaign foreign policy advisor indicted and convicted, Mr. Papadopoulos. A former campaign manager on his way to jail, Mr. Manafort. A former campaign aide and Manafort's longtime junior business partner indicted. A former foreign policy national security advisor pleaded guilty, Mr. Flynn. This is high levels of a campaign where crimes are not just being discussed, there have been convictions and guilty pleas. What's behind all of that? We need to know. And incidentally, Mr. Speaker, the American people are footing the bill for this, about $25 million as far as we can tell. They've got a right to know. But in addition to whatever happened in the campaign, really bad stuff happened in Russia. We know from our own intelligence agencies that Russia made a concerted effort and a determined effort and well-financed effort to interfere in our election. Could I have another minute?
The
I yield
gentleman
the gentleman
from California.
an additional 30 seconds.
The gentleman is granted an additional 30 seconds.
The outside interference goes to the heart of our democracy. The most important challenge for our country is that we, the citizens of this country, make the decision on who is our president, who are our senators, who are our representatives. And we have to get to the bottom of what Russia did, how they did it, so that we can take steps to make certain that that does not happen in the future, and it's the American people who decide who is their leader. Release the Mueller report. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume, and I'm looking for something to disagree with my friend from Vermont about. I don't disagree with him about anything at all. I thought that was a very thoughtful presentation. The only thing I would point out is the reason that he doesn't know what's in the Mueller report and the American people don't know what's in the Mueller report is because as of today, there's no Mueller report. That's the only reason. The only reason we don't know what's in it is because it hasn't been released yet. And I don't mean released to the public. I mean Mueller hasn't written it and handed it to the Attorney General yet, and so we don't know. When that happens, let me tell you what the Attorney General has said, Mr. Speaker. The Attorney General has committed to being transparent with Congress and the public, consistent with the rules and the law. I don't think we would ask anything different of him. The Attorney General has committed to providing as much information as he can, consistent with current regulations. I don't think we'd ask anything different of him than that, and certainly this resolution does not ask anything different of him other than that. He says his objective and goal is to get as much information as he can to the public. It's exactly what this resolution asks for, exactly what he's already committed to. And he says, I feel I'm in a position in life where I can do the right thing and not care about the consequences. I can be truly independent. Well, that doesn't just mean truly independent from pressure put on him from the White House. It also means truly independent from statements of opinion sent to him by the U.S. House. He's going to do the right thing as allowed by the law and resolutions. And if he doesn't, this House can act and try to push a different outcome. Just understand that that is not what this resolution does today. It's simply a statement of fact. And my friend from California, there are those members in Congress that sometimes they speak and you just want to get out your sharp stick, Mr. Speaker, and poke them a little bit harder. They don't calm you down, they rile you up. My friend from California is one of those folks whose thoughtful words always recenter me and remind me what we have together. And he's right about hyperbole, and I don't want to mischaracterize this resolution. It does do one thing that's not available in current law today. and that is that it makes the official position of the United States House known. I have always presumed that the Attorney General would follow the law. This resolution says we expect the Attorney General to follow the law. And with that, it's not that it does nothing, it's just that it does something so very little. Perhaps our time would be better spent elsewhere, but I support the underlying premise. I reserve the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank my friend for pointing out that I'm not a poker, that I might actually be trying to be thoughtful. Maybe it's because I was once registered as a Republican. I don't regularly admit that sometimes, at least not in my district. But I do think this conversation is important on multiple levels. And I appreciate the fact that you are here to present your side of the aisle's position. I think there is a danger here for us to resume sort of to our corners. And this is an instance where I really think it's important and hopefully it's newsworthy to the media and to the general public that we are coming to this moment. And although it's a resolution, I still think it's significant without indulging in hyperbole. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman, my friend from Colorado, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Perlmutter.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
And I thank the gentleman from California, and I thank the gentleman from Georgia. I've not heard you two be so agreeable. Disagreeable is what usually you are, but so agreeable. And the reason there's agreement here is we all want to see what's in this report. And I rise in strong support of the rule and the underlying resolution, and I'd like to remind everybody about what the Mueller investigation is about. Russia interfered in the 2016 U.S. presidential election with, in my opinion, the goal of helping Donald Trump be elected. This is a fact confirmed by the U.S. intelligence community as well as by the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. This should concern every American, Republican, Democrat, or Independent. In response to this unprecedented attack on our elections, Robert Mueller was appointed to serve as special counsel for the Justice Department to follow the facts wherever they may lead, whether they implicate people or exonerate people. We need to know precisely what happened, to understand who was involved, how it was accomplished, and ultimately hold those responsible for attack on our election accountable under our laws. This investigation will also ensure we better protect our elections in the future. Now, we've had 2 convictions of Mr. Manafort, 7 guilty pleas, 34 people and 3 companies indicted as part of the Mueller investigation. 6 of the people indicted were part of President Trump's inner circle with the campaign and business. So it is important for us to understand precisely what is in the report, and I appreciate the fact that the Rules Committee unanimously supported this particular rule and the underlying resolution. And I say to my friend from Georgia, you're right. The law is what it is, and that it says should be withheld till fully written and prepared. And then if Mr. Barr does what he says he was going to do, it'll be made available to all of us. And we are emphasizing that point because Americans should know precisely what happened and where this investigation has led. And with that, I'd yield back to my friend from California and thank him for bringing this rule.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
I would tell my friend I do not have any speakers remaining at this point, and so I will reserve.
Great, thank you. Gentleman.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you. Let me thank the gentleman from California and congratulate him on his new distinguished post on the Rules Committee, and my good friend who I've seen quite frequently over the years at the Rules Committee, and I've known of his consistent concern with the rule of law and truly appreciate his comments today as it relates to the rule of law, and would like my comments to be strictly on that question and really the American people of whom each and every one of us come here to represent. I don't want to recount in detail, but I do want to make mention that we know that the Intelligence Committee in January 2017 concluded, and that is the intelligence community, concluded in a report that Russian President Putin ordered and influenced the campaign of 2016 and the presidential election, and we all know recently that there were attempts to influence the 2018 election. We won't dwell on that. We won't dwell on the fact that there is discussions and review in the special counsel's work dealing with collusion or the questions dealing with the campaign of the present president and Russia. I believe that the real point of this is to answer the questions of the American people. If we say that the purpose of appointing the special counsel to oversee the investigation is to ensure that the American public would have full confidence in the integrity of the investigation, regardless of what it says. I'm here to say, regardless of what the Mueller report will say. And we know that there will be comments made by the general public, leaders of Congress, and that is their right as Americans. But we want to reinforce the fact that the DOJ regulations themselves say that investigations results should be made fully extended to the American public in the public interest, and that the results of that report should be made available to the American people. Obviously, being concerned about persons that are mentioned with no relevance whatsoever, as a lawyer, I would want to make sure such protections occur. But it is true that Special Counsel Mueller previously served in the Department of Justice as a prosecutor and director of the FBI under Republican and Democratic administrations, where he built a reputation of competence, fairness, and nonpartisanship. With that in mind, we thank him for the work he has done that has shown a number of guilty pleas and other responses. But the main point is the American people, to know that their government adheres to the rule of law and the integrity of the Constitution. All we're asking today is to reflect in a sense of Congress that you, the American people, that my colleagues in this House and Senate should have the right to see the full report. I ask for support of the underlying bill, and I ask us to do it in a bipartisan way. I yield back my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask my friend from California if he has any speakers remaining.
No, that's our last speaker.
Then
we have no more.
Unless the gentleman would like to close, I am prepared to close.
I'm anticipating your brilliant close. I'd like to try to follow you if I could.
I appreciate my friend from California. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I hope folks pay attention to some of those things that have brought folks together today, and I hope folks pay attention to some of those things that haven't brought us together today. We've talked about whether there has been overstatement and hyperbole, whether it comes from that end of Pennsylvania Avenue or this end of Pennsylvania Avenue. None of us are advantaged by that. It breeds more distrust in the American public, breeds more distrust in this institution. We've talked about who's to blame within the administration. Of course, there's news today of Paul Manafort's sentence, not for anything related to the election, but for things related to his private business practices. There'll be efforts to conflate those two investigations. Those are two different investigations, and I think the American people are disadvantaged if they are led to believe that those sentences are related to the election of the President of the United States. But what you've heard is a lot of unanimity, as you would expect, that we are a nation of laws and the rule of law should be followed and transparency should be our touchstone, and the American people, the boss of each and every one of us, whether we work on that end of Pennsylvania Avenue or this end of Pennsylvania Avenue, have a right to know what their tax dollars have paid for and what their government is up to. I find that very encouraging that we have that sense of agreement here today, Mr. Speaker. What is noticeably absent in this resolution is the dramatic overreach that I think has characterized most of the work we have done so far in 2019. Things that could have been partnership issues have been pushed further and further and further and further out to the edge of the political continuum that they became partisan issues. This resolution does not make those mistakes of the past. And to my friend from California's point, these things are done incrementally. Trust is built incrementally. Relationships grow incrementally. And success happens incrementally. It is my great hope, Mr. Speaker, that those things that unite us, transparency, rule of law, trust in and of the American people, will begin today to flourish in ways perhaps those common themes have not thus far. And both parties play a role in that disappointing outcome. But success has to begin on one day, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps success begins today. I serve on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. There's no such thing as a Republican road or a Democratic bridge. There's no such thing as sitting in traffic on a Democratic highway or missing your child's soccer game because of malfunctions on a Republican road. We're all in this together, and that is true more often than not. I do not plan to offer a previous question today, Mr. Speaker, because this isn't one of those issues that dramatically divides us. As my friend suggested, in the Rules Committee, we passed this out. I think our first voice vote of the year out of the Rules Committee, and intend to do exactly that today. With that, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate my friend from California for yielding the time and leading the debate today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, it's a pleasure to see you up there, and to my friend from Georgia, in his long, illustrious public career, I want to thank him. I want to thank him for his comedy here today, and I can't help but think so many Americans now and people who are filled with adrenaline and hyperbole talk about what a difficult time this is, and I wouldn't underestimate the challenges ahead of us. But at inarguably a more difficult time, I was thinking of Mr. Lincoln's comments about appealing to the better angels of our nature. And perhaps this is a turning point. And certainly we will be tested and we will fail on occasion. But to my friend, for whatever time both of us have left here, I would like to personally say, to the degree we can find things that are of interest to your district and my district, they're of interest to the United States. And I'd love to work with you to find those things. And lastly, I just can't help but comment on my observation about providential Americans in history and Mr. Mueller I was reading about him and his comments when he was FBI director in the context of his amazing life and career as a combat veteran, a Bronze Star winner in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. I think of my own father, who was a devoted Marine Corps combat veteran who's buried in Arlington. And my dad and all Marines, although I was not one, like to always recite Semper Fidelis. And the special counsel, in his comments when he was FBI director, assures me that the work he does in ways that I find profound is he talked about fidelity as he talked to his agents. That the fidelity to this Constitution, to this country, and to the truth will find us through to the path that we want to take and to success as we look for the better angels of our nature. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a simple vote, but an important vote. We need to get to the bottom of what happened and put faith in the special counsel's findings and put faith in the American public and the people that they can devise their own truth when we give them this investigation's report. You either believe the public and Congress should see the report or don't. Fortunately, it looks like we are agreed that they should. We owe it to our constituents and the American people and to future generations to do the right thing always, but today I think in particular to support the release of this report. Mr. Speaker, I urge a yes vote in the rule and a yes vote on the previous question, and I yield back the balance of the time and move the previous question on the resolution.
Andrew Desiderio joins